See some new faces here tonight. And just a quick reminder before we get started with our presentation this evening, we have one more of our spring speaker series presentation, which there's a few weeks in between it. It's not next week. It's Monday, May 21st. And we have Kathy Coulter, who's one of our board members, volunteer, and also one of our genealogists who's written books on genealogy, and she's going to talk to our group on how to research a family tree, which I think is a very interesting subject that a lot of people are really picking up and tracing their roots. So she's going to give us some good hints on how to go about doing that. And now I'm going to have Linda Beatty, our board member, introduce our Grove Manor speakers.
We're going to do this a little odd, as always. I'm going to introduce my friend Jeff Black, who works at Grove Manor, and he's the Director of Business Development. I've known him since he was a little boy. I was hoping your mom was coming tonight, but she isn't coming. But I asked Jeff to introduce Dr. Guy because he knows him much better than I do. So if you would do that, Jeff, I appreciate it.
Sure, I always do it, Linda, tell me.
I'm glad you learned.
Yeah, well, you know, Linda and Janice both taught me a lot of scripture growing up, going to the same church. So
Sing the Whirly Bird song.
yeah, we're for Jesus. Yeah, obviously, it's actually an honor to be asked to speak to this group and this organization. Fortunately for you, I won't be the one speaking. We have Dr. Guy, who is the resident expert on Grove Manor, talk to you folks about the history of Grove Manor, which might surprise a number of you. You might feel like, well, I'm pretty familiar with Grove Manor and how it started and all those things, but you might be surprised at actually how deep those roots really go. And that's why it's better that I'm not the speaker, that Dr. Guy is the speaker. Dr. Guy was a chaplain at Grove Manor for a number of years, and he's been an instrumental part in the Allegheny region of the Churches of God, which is Grove Manor is affiliated with. He's currently serving as our board president. So Grove Manor exists on North Broad Street. Grove Manor also exists in Franklin. Grove Manor also exists in Scottsdale, Pennsylvania. So we have some different locations. And it kind of, if you kind of look at that and you kind of plop down the Allegheny region of the Church of God and where those churches are, you kind of see that we're right in the mix of all of it, which is exactly what they wanted to do. And Dr. Guy comes to us as kind of a local kid from the Elwood City area. He's currently, and I'm very proud to say this, currently serving a Presbyterian church in Elwood City, the Wurtemberg Presbyterian Church, if any of you are familiar with that. It's that beautiful white church that kind of sits up on the hill there as you cross the bridge. So he's pretty local to us, but his knowledge of this topic in particular, which is the Grove Manor Corporation, is pretty extensive and truly what the mission and ministry of why it started and how we're trying to continue it as we move forward. So I will not speak anymore and allow Dr. Guy to fill in all the blanks and all the questions that you probably will have.
Thank you, Jeff.
Yep.
Yeah, well, I would also like to thank you for the opportunity to be here. It's been a lot of years since I've been in this building, and you guys have made some progress since I was last in here. Jeff kind of introduced me. I didn't come here to talk about myself anyway, so but I'm very happy to talk about Grove Manor. Very excited to share these stories. You guys are the first ones to hear these stories strung together the way I'm stringing them together. So I'll be interested in your feedback. Which ones are interesting and which ones you could do without. Hey, Mike. Sure. So I want to thank Jeff for the invite to share these stories here. It was Jeff that came up with the title, not just the history of Grove Manor, but more than just a building on Broad Street. And I could imagine, when somebody heard this was going to be a history of Grove Manor, people scratching their heads and like, why would I want to know about that? Like, who really cares that much about Grove Manor, other than a few of us in this room? I better grab this thing here. This is actually where the building on Broad Street is. This was taken before the driveway to the brick house that's still there, and some of these houses have been torn down in the middle. And this fella, Arnold Berg, you'll get to be familiar with him here in a little bit, but he's standing there because we're about to construct a building on North Broad Street. And this is, you might expect in a History of Grove Manor presentation, the cornerstone ceremony. So 1970, these are the guys that gathered for that momentous occasion, almost 50 years. So 1970, we're looking at an anniversary here coming up very shortly. But Grove Manor isn't a building. There's much, much more to Grove Manor than what happens even inside that building. So as you all know, there's always more to the story. And I heard somebody mention about genealogy. When you start digging, it gets exciting. You start finding these things, and you start uncovering things. And once you start realizing, hey, there's some interesting stories here, then it's fascinating, and you just want to keep digging. That's what I've been doing for the past 10, 12 years. And, well, 2 points about this picture. One is, that's not the cornerstone. Hey. These
start at the beginning, if you would.
Yeah. These are the cornerstones. That tells you something right from the beginning about Grove Manor. It's not about the building. It's not about the task at hand. It's about the people. And then anybody know some of these people other than Mary Blair back there? I'm sure Mary knows about half of these people. Who are these people? Why are they there in the first place? And if I were to just kind of, I'd start sounding like, what's the guy, the rest of the story? Now you know the rest of this. Yeah, exactly. Hopefully by the end of this presentation, you'll get a sense of what the rest of the story is all about. So these folks are the cornerstone. But who are these people? And that's the other thing. Who are they? Well, you got to ask the same question of this next picture. I did a presentation at the board meeting, a month ago, 2 months ago, something like that, and I brought out this picture of the West Pennsylvania Conference of the Churches of God from 1872. None of you know any of these guys. You'll know a few of them by the time we're done here. But who are these people, and what were they about? What's their connection with Grove Manor? I'll give you a little bit of a hint. I pointed out the guy in the middle because he was the big Mennonite Church of God leader down in Scottsdale, where our Woodcrest campus is. And I'm going to point out this guy today because you all know his name. You maybe don't know it's even a name, but this is Henry Barkey, who lived about 7 miles that way. Barkeyville. That's Henry Barkey. We'll see him again here in a little bit. And I'll let you in on a little secret. Their kids and grandkids kept intermarrying. Families must have got along okay, but movers and shakers came from that mixture there. But let me go back one more. Clear up in this left-hand corner. There's a picture of this. 1872. This is a picture of the Good Samaritan. You know the story, right? I don't need to tell you that. Very clearly stated our mission. Now, probably in around 2000, Grove Manor explicitly placed a phrase from the Good Samaritan, and he saw him and he was moved with compassion as part of Grove Manor's mission statement. And it was almost the sense that somebody pulled that out of their hat. But they didn't really pull that out of their hat. They pulled it out of their collective memory in the churches of God, because it has been a part of our ethos for, well, a lot of years. So I brought some stuff here. I'm going to start answering this question: who are these people? There's a little book. In fact, I'm going to grab this book. It's a pretty special book. You can tell it's old. In answer to who are these people, in answer to how Grove Manor ended up here, you really have to go back to what this book talks about. This book is The Martyr's Mirror. Any of you ever heard of it? I know, because we're in a Presbyterian town, right? Yeah, Barkeyville's a Church of God town. Grove City's a Presbyterian town. I kind of live in both worlds. I understand both worlds. One of the things you need to know about the Churches of God is it's a mixture. It's kind of a mutt denomination. They started German Reformed and took in a whole bunch of Mennonites, and then they went through the Second Great Awakening, and they turned out this new thing in Harrisburg. You'll get to meet the founder here in just a second. But the Martyr's Mirror is the Fox's Book of Martyrs for the Mennonites and the Amish. In fact, I have an Amish friend over there near Volant, and I asked him about this book, and he said, "Oh yeah, I've got a copy of that." And it's in German, of course, and it has all the pretty pictures. This is an English copy. It doesn't have the pretty pictures. But what's interesting is these Mennonites came to Pennsylvania. Anybody know why the Mennonites from Switzerland, especially around Bern, came to Pennsylvania? Two reasons. The religious wars were going on. They were horrible in Europe. Christians killing Christians for a long period of time, and the losers not being welcome. So they fled. And they fled not helter-skelter one at a time. They fled in entire communities. And the severe persecutions just because of their faith. Anabaptists were more heartfelt, private life kind of people, and they didn't really care so much about the doctrinal statements that the Reformed folks were attached to, and they clashed. And it was, well, kind of like the Civil War was here. When you're in a fighting mood, you want to fight over everything, and well, a lot of good folks on all sides got hurt in that conflict. But William Penn, that's the second reason, William Penn understood that. And when he started this colony here, one of the things he did in order to expand his colony, in order to not just sell the land, but live into the vision that he had for his colony, was to invite those who had been persecuted, like the Quakers, into Pennsylvania, so that there was a place where everybody could kind of coexist and build a community together. That's pretty much unique to Pennsylvania at that point. And some of those families, the big first major German migration was in 1717, and a lot of these folks that are recorded in here, I was going to read a passage, but I don't think I will. But I will tell you this. The ones that are part of this story have their own page in the back of this book. And I could name several names. I did that in the meeting. And they were names of people that are on our board. And of course, ancestors of Henry Barkey. Anybody know what building this is?
Is that a church with two separate doors?
Well, it is. It's an old Mennonite church. And looks kind of distorted from my you got a good view of it there. This is the Mennonite building down in Harmony. Anybody ever taken the tour down there in Harmony and seen this guy's picture? I couldn't get a really good picture of it. I took that one myself. You can almost kind of see me there. But this is Abraham Ziegler, one of those Mennonite folks that came over from Switzerland to Philadelphia, of course. And then Ziegler ended up buying Father Rapp's community down there in Harmony. So we know the story of the Harmonites when they built this whole community there, and then they decided to move to Indiana, and they sold it to this guy. 1815, $100,000. Now the buying price was $200,000, and then he renegotiated. But that's a lot of money back then. So these were not nobodies. They're not poor refugees. They're landed families who were displaced because of these wars. And he bought, I don't know how many brick buildings it was, and 9,000 acres, moved the whole community from Philadelphia there. And among that community was Abraham Barkey, Henry Barkey's dad. I'll spare you the details on Henry Barkey's early story. His dad got involved in the cholera epidemic, died there in the 1830s. He's buried in the cemetery behind that church. But Henry Barkey was a pretty serious Mennonite, pretty serious about his faith. And not all the Mennonites, it's like any group, there's some that are more serious about their faith, some that are more serious about, getting other things done, and there was kind of a split. Let me just to kind of show you this harmony. This guy is John Weinbrenner, the founder of the Churches of God. He was a German Reformed, so one of those Reformed guys that got locked out of his own church. He was influenced by Finney. He wanted a vibrant faith, and so he preached toward a vibrant faith. Not everybody was interested in being so vibrant. So they locked him out, and he didn't know what to do, and so he started meeting out in the fields with the people that also got locked out with him. And next thing you know, it was, it caught on. There were all sorts of other displaced Reformed folks and displaced Mennonites, and he started holding meetings in several different places, 1820s, 1830s, 1840s, rapidly growing Pennsylvania-born denomination. Now, interesting thing about the Church of God that really comes into play still, I'm going to steal another book here. The fellow that published that book in English also published this book, along with John Weinbrenner, and it's all the religious denominations of the United States. And I love what they did. They didn't just write a book and tell everybody else's stories. They enlisted people from all the different denominations to tell their own story. And then they put them all in one book, in one cover, as kind of a living illustration of, there's really only one book, there's really only one faith, there's really only one Jesus. And we're all involved in different flavors, different ways in the Church of God. That's why he made the denomination the way he did. Just one church, the Church of God. Well, Barkey bought into this vision. A lot of the Mennonites in Harmony did not. So he wasn't quite sure what to do. So Barkey followed this fellow's name, John Hickernell. He was an itinerant, kind of a Francis Asbury kind of fellow. 140-mile circuit every week, every other week. He would just kind of make his rounds. And he was the primary pastor for Western Pennsylvania in the Churches of God, but he enlisted others, and one of those was Henry Barkey. Henry Barkey preached in German every week, every Lord's Day. But Harmony wanted to stay kind of old Mennonite. They weren't interested in this vibrant faith. And so Henry Barkey decided he was going to move. His grandfather lived on the Venango Path, way up north. Anybody know where the Venango Path is? Route 8? Pretty much. And, this is the old house. The only picture I've ever seen of it. Not the best picture, But you can see it's an old stone house. It's over 100 years old when this picture was taken in the 50s. And then Quickfill came in and buried it. So it's under a Quickfill somewhere. So this is about the only glimpse you're ever going to see of it. But this was John Latshaw's house. It was Henry Barkey's grandfather's house. And the grandfather said, why don't you come up here? We need a pastor anyway. There's a lot of Germans that aren't getting the word preached to them. So you come up here. If you want to build a village, build your village up here. And that's what he did. He left Harmony, moved up here on the Venango path, and he started selling off lots because he had a vision. What would Harmony be like, historic Harmony, if it had a vibrant faith as well? The Mennonite vision of caring for one another and doing life as a community in which the vibrant faith and the Great Commission was a part of it. Kind of like, picture this a little bit. What would the Amish look like if they were missionaries? We tend to think of the Amish as kind of ingrown and they withdraw. But if they were mission-minded and they were sent, that's a little different picture. But that's who these Mennonites were. That's who Henry Barkey was. And that's what he perceived his village to be. A village that would grow people, a village that would take care of people, and a village that would send them, and that would welcome them back when their work is done. Beautiful vision, I think. This is Route 8. You probably never saw it looking like this. But this is Barkeyville looking north. So no Interstate 80, no truck stops. But this is the village. You can see it a little more here because some of the buildings are there. That little storefront is still there. But this is the village that Henry Barkey built. And the way he built it was everybody has their own space. So it wasn't communism. Everybody had homes. And if you couldn't afford your home, they would come together and help provide you a home. This was a place where the old pastors could retire to. People who had gone from church to church to church to church, lived in parsonages all their life, 30, 40, 50, 60 years of ministry. Then what happens to them? They didn't really have a plan. But Barkey's plan was, well, we welcome them back to the community, we find a place for them, and that's where they live out the rest of their days. Can you see Grove Manor's vision emerging early here? Taking care of people. Where do they go? It wasn't just the ministers either. A lot of folks outlived their kids. Back before Social Security, back before nursing homes, what did they do? They didn't have kids to take care of them. Well, they were kind of in bad shape. Barkey's vision also was, one of these days, I'm not going to be around anymore. So how do we perpetuate this? Well, this is his nephew, another Latshaw, John Latshaw, the grandson of the one who had the old house. He was born here and then moved to Iowa, raised in Iowa out there, went educated, taught school in Minnesota, pretty much kind of the same time frame as Laura Ingalls Wilder, Iowa, Minnesota, you can kind of picture it that way. 1880s, he graduates from college at Hillsdale, Michigan, gets his first pastorate here. Well, Barkeyville, comes back to Barkeyville, and his vision was to start kids out right. Most of us kind of pick up some of these ideas later in life when we realize what's valuable late. But what if you plant these seeds early and grow them right? Teach them the faith, teach them mission, teach them responsibility for the community early. Well, maybe that'll yield a different result. And of course it did. This is the Barkeyville Academy. Anybody ever heard of the Barkeyville Academy? This is it. This is the class of, where are we at? Somewhere around 1895. I could do a whole presentation on the academy. I'm not going to get sidetracked here, but you get a sense of who these folks are. They're well dressed. The curriculum was spectacular. A lot of parallels between the Barkeyville Academy and Grove City College in the early years. Latshaw and Kettler had an awful lot in common. Kettler was involved in the commencement service at the academy while Latshaw was still there. And then, then Latshaw gets called away. The denomination was changing. They're migrating west. They moved the national headquarters to Findlay, Ohio. And so all of a sudden, the Barkeyville Academy is not so central anymore. It lasted about 20 years, and they moved the operations to Findlay. I'll give you this picture. That's the college that they went to out there in Findlay. A lot of these men were the pastors in the Church of God. This is about 1903. And many of them were involved in the academy. Many of them were involved in the University of Findlay. So they wore both hats. So these guys made the decision, we'll close the one, open the other. And when you do that, and you draw the best and the brightest away from the one into the other, it starts kind of to go away. And Barkeyville, right around 1906, it closed. That's right about when Slippery Rock is gaining steam. And so the locals went to Grove City or Slippery Rock, and the hardline Church of God folks got on the train, often here in Grove City, and went out to Findlay. We'll come back to this picture here in a couple minutes. But this guy, I'm going to point out to you here in just a second. But before I do that, I got to tell you about these guys. I pointed to the guy in the middle, Peter Laux, in that big picture. This is his son Erastus, principal of the academy, and this is his wife, Henry Barkey's granddaughter. And this young lady is our first medical missionary of the Church of God. The realization that medicine is a part of what we do came very early, and he spent his entire career out there in Findlay College once he left here. I'd love to tell you stories about him, but again, I'm not going to get sidetracked on that. But in 1902, we sent our first missionaries to India. This is them, students at the academy, and the work that they did in India is pretty impressive. It's over 100 years now. Every year, their medical clinic treats well over 100,000 patients. It's no longer in India because the country changed, and now they're same place, but it's now Bangladesh. I could tell you more stories about the Laux that was Rockefeller's chief of surgery in Peking, China. Same group, Henry Barkey's great-grandson. I could tell you about Grace Laux Elliott, who was the president of the worldwide YWCA after World War II. Tell me that's not a significant work. But not everybody's scattered. And you can't just gauge quality by how, their amazing stories and where they ended up. A lot of amazing people stay home, right? And they invest in the community in which they live. So I won't tell those stories. This is the Women's Missionary Society, right about the same time. And I'm just going to bring a little pointer thing, so I didn't have to keep doing this. But look at this cute lady here. She's part of Barkey's family as well. She's involved in this missionary society. And they not only sent missionaries around the world, they were very active in what happens here in western Pennsylvania. And then, of course, a lot of families were just here. This is an old shack right on the Mercer-Venango County line. These folks, this is the Aiken family. They went to the Amity Church, and then they were kind of inspired by that vibrant religion of the Church of God, and so they left the Presbyterian clan and ended up over there in Barkeyville. 4 in this group went to the Barkeyville Academy, and this is perhaps the most significant. I brought we republished his memoirs a few years back. So there's some great pictures in here if you want to get a glimpse of him. And this is his communion set. 1899, graduate of the academy. His name is Forney Aiken. Mary, did you know F.O. Aiken?
Yeah, he married us.
I thought so. So he did some significant ministry here in the community. This is his sister Etta. She also graduated from the academy. Cute lady. She was Isaac Kettler's housekeeper for a while. I don't really know how long she was there, but the communities kind of mingled. So this is Forney Aiken's youngest son, Arthur Aiken, and I'll be introducing him again here in just a few minutes as the first president of the board of Grove Manor. But the significant thing about him when he was young is that he got the vision. He got it through his dad, who grew up here in Barkeyville and was involved in pastoral ministry for 60 years. He was also. But he had a heart for the young and the old. He got our camps going in West Virginia, in Ohio, and in Western Pennsylvania. Youth camps. Year after year after year, you see the pictures of the camps, and there's Arthur in those pictures. Great guy. When I was a little boy, I grew up next to him. I was 8 years old. I lost my little play pistols, and he found them for me and encouraged me to go to church. And his gentle demeanor impressed me. Samora Barkey's family, these guys never left either. They ran the store in Barkeyville for a lot of years till they got too old, couldn't manage it anymore. But they stayed at home, kept the vision alive, even though, now think about this, 1906, the academy goes away and the best and brightest move, and then there's hard times. What are they? World War I, the Great Depression, World War II. Those are some big distractions, and it's pretty easy for a mission and a vision to be lost. And I think they probably were waylaid for a while, but there was enough of an ethos active in the culture that, the cries started going out. Look, we were going to do something with these older folks. The village left. We're not doing anything anymore with these folks. What are we going to do? After World War II, some of these folks kept the vision alive. I love this picture because there's Arthur Aiken. Here's his brother who started our seminary. And then there's this guy. This guy is the blacksmith's son, Billy Shaw. Billy Shaw never left Barkeyville. Graduated from the academy. He was a sharp guy, very good farmer. And that's what he did. He was trained as a minister as well, and he's part of this conference meeting because he was credentialed for a while. But he believed in investing in your community. And you can see he's, this is taken in 1934. It's right there. He's starting to get a little bit older. It's during the Depression. He realizes that there's some things missing. It took him a while to get this going. But he took his dad's property in Barkeyville and set it aside as a nursing home. Now that's a hard thing to do by yourself, especially if you're a single guy. And then, of course, everybody gets old. So it was on the books as a nursing home, never opened. He died in 1958. And but it was long enough to keep the dream alive. 1961, I told you you'd see this picture again. This guy with a little dot in his head dies in a shack down by the Allegheny River. 60 years of ministry, no place to go. And the conference was kind of shamed that we'd not taken care of our own. That's when the cry, and this is where the stories start picking up that we know as the history of Grove Manor. His name's Bob Dylan, no relation to the singer. But when Robert Dylan died, it shocked everybody, and they realized we've got to do something. This guy's the one that called the meeting. Called the meeting, closed the door, and said, we've been talking about this stuff for 30 years. We're not leaving this room until we vote either to do something with our old people or just quit talking about it. Are we going to follow the Great Commission or not? The very same year they were building the camp. And it wasn't that people didn't believe in taking care of the old people, but, you know, the young are the future of the church, right? So there was this tension. And, well, we know how that tension goes. You need to do it all. We're called to take care of all. And that's what they did. He called for that meeting. How many of you know Lester Thornton? I know Mary does. Okay. Yeah, there's Lester as a young fella. Yes, Lester's the one that made the motions. 7 written motions in a row. He did not slow down. I don't know if he even took a breath, because this was going to pass. And it passed. And Grove Manor was born. So they passed the motions, and they didn't have 2 nickels to rub together. That was this lady's job. The Missionary Society, right? So the Missionary Society got involved. They sold bonds at 7% interest. Next thing you know, these little ladies that work in their churches, sewing circles and all of that. You know Connie, right? $500,000 they raised. And Grove Manor was born. This is May Aiken, another one of the Aikens from that little shack. This is Arthur again, the board president. And this is the building on Broad Street. It looks a little nicer now. There's that cornerstone. It's found its place, and the rest of the cornerstones have done their work as well. So Velma Mainhart, just a couple last stories. She was the first administrator. She moved in. She did not take a salary for a full year, and she lived in the facility so that she wanted to make sure everything was happening the way it's supposed to happen. People are being taken care of the way they're supposed to be taken care of. Howard Potter was the brainchild behind the caring place, and all of a sudden Grove Manor is in Franklin. And one last picture, thought I would do it in color. This is Lester and his first wife, Louise. This is the little garage that used to be with the little parsonage that were behind Grove Manor. I used to live in that house, and then they told me I had to move because they were going to add on, and now it's a wing. But if you saw the little ad that came out, what was that, a month ago, for Grove Manor, Grove Manor's first resident, these guys were both in the picture. Louise was dressed as a nurse. And that's really enough. Happy to entertain any questions. I know that was kind of fast, especially with a bunch of, going through a photo album of a bunch of people that you don't know. So happy to entertain some questions. Or
How many residents do you have now?
Jeff, how many?
We have 59 skilled beds at Grove Manor. We have 30 folks living in the personal care, which is the end of the building closest to Dr. Eaton's practice there. And then in Caring Place in Franklin, we have 102 beds in that facility with I think 45 units for our personal care there. And then at Woodcrest, that's a pretty large facility. It's tough to kind of gauge exactly how many we could fit because there's independent living, townhouses, a personal care. So there's a lot of people could live there. So it's not just one. So, but we have several hundred people that are living within the Grove Manor communities right now.
Plus, I don't know, 150 employees, something like that? Not exactly sure.
It's like 200.
200, okay.
Yeah, maybe part of the rest of the story. kind of is what you see now. And of course, we have a mission-driven organization that's highly influenced by the church. But we're now kind of conflicted because we are complying with federal regulations and state laws and those kind of things. So we're living out kind of two worlds in the sense that we are taking the vision and the mission and ministry goals that have been set before us, and yet we're providing a very high-performing, pretty well known within these communities, skilled nursing, personal care. We're pretty well known even nationally for what we're able to do there. And so that's kind of what Grove Manor, the corporation, looks like now. There's a very professional side to it and a very high-performing business side, but at the same time, we also have a very high-performing mission focus. And so, as Rob was saying, we took both of those visions, and it's been merged into one. And most recently, the board has really kind of laid the gauntlet down to the employees and said, this is who we are, this is what we're doing, we want you to be a part of it.
It's easy for regulations to kind of make us think we're in the healthcare business, when the truth of the matter is we've always only been in the people business. And taking care of people has this entirely professional aspect to it. But if it's just professional, if we're just attending to bodies and not people who have hearts and souls and social dimensions, a lot gets lost. And so it's important, I think, for us to remember what our mission says, that we believe in the inherent worth and dignity of each person, that they're providentially entrusted into our care, and that we're called to share in Christ's ministry of compassion to them. And I think as we keep that sense of calling before us, not only do we continue to stand in this pretty impressive legacy, but we're always going to be standing where Christ has called us to stand. Other questions?
The property where you built, Morgan Barnes, who was the George Junior Republic, and that's a social thing. I just wonder if he was involved at all, or it just happened to be you bought that property. That's where his house was, and a good bit of the property was his.
That's a really good question. I would love to know that. I was 6 when they had that cornerstone, and I wish I'd have thought of some of these questions to ask, because Lester and Arnold were involved in those discussions, and those are just pieces of the story. I have no idea.
I think one of our members, Mary Ann's
I
not
actually
here. Oh, there
was
she
going
is.
to say,
Okay.
Dr. Barnes was involved in that he was allowed to sit in on the meetings during the formation. He had no voting rights or anything, but he was so well respected in the community that they included him. Gary and I grew up in that neighborhood, and when the Churches of God were buying the property, they bought Dr. Barnes's property and they bought my parents' property.
Oh, wow.
So your very first picture, the driveway that you were showing, was my home driveway.
Okay.
But Dr. Barnes was so well respected that everybody always asked his opinion.
Okay.
So you grew up in the brick house?
I did.
Have you been in the brick house?
No, you're a little bit confused about the brick house. The brick house that you originally had personal care, that was Nell Reed's tea room. Beside, going north, beside that building was another 3-story Victorian house that they called the gingerbread house. That was my parents' home.
Okay.
And that's,
You grew
that's
up
the
in the
driveway.
gingerbread house.
That on the left was the driveway. That was hers, and it was torn down.
I remember hearing the stories about them tearing that down, and Lester coming up the ladder and them telling Lester, get down off of that ladder, your place is on the ground. Some people are better at some things than others.
One of the reasons that Dr. Barnes was so enamored of the whole idea was that he had an invalid wife, and she had been an invalid for most of her adult life. And he was very pleased with the concept that people were going to look after older people and the worth of older
What
people.
was her name? Do you have
You know, I don't know. Do you, Gary?
anybody?
I don't.
We just always were taught to call her Mrs.
Well,
Barnes.
yeah.
And he would wheel her out onto the large porch that surrounded the White House. He would wheel her out onto the porch, and she always wanted the children from the neighborhood to come and talk to her. We were always made to feel we could go sit on the porch.
Yes.
When were the other facilities, other than Grove City, put into effect?
Grove City, 1970. Franklin, 1995. And that's the year we almost went bankrupt because we realized the industry had changed so much we didn't know what we were doing anymore. I honestly don't remember when Woodcrest was built because it was actually constructed by the Mennonites. I want to say 35 years ago, and we acquired it not quite 10 years ago, something like that. So we don't really go back to their beginning. And we've expanded it once. I think we're expanding it a second time. There's just quite a need down there in Scottsdale. But all three facilities, I think, are pretty nicely maintained. And yeah, they're all three have personalities of their own. Any other?
Rob, what's the significance of the wooden item?
Oh, yeah. I rushed through some stories, and I told you this is Forney's communion set. When Henry Barkey moved to from Harmony / Evans City, he didn't move alone in traditional Mennonite fashion. He pulled the community up with him, and his best friend was one of the ones that come up. So if you look in the deeds, as they built Barkeyville, Henry Barkey's lot is number 1. Michael Lycan's lot is number 2. And Michael Lycan was a school teacher from Evans City and very, very close friends with Barkey. His son wasn't so much a scholar. His son's name is John Lycan. His son was more of a craftsman. And with this whole idea of community and, nursing home, you've got your dietary, you have your housekeeping, that was Etta, and this is the laundry. There were two washing machine manufacturers in Barkeyville. John Lycan was one, and his cousin, the name Kuntz was the other. We have washing machines made by both of them, but John Lycan actually made this as a salesman sample. He would go around and show people how it works. It's true to scale. It's broken in a couple of places. It has a broken thing here patched with string, and it has a broken leg that he patched himself. And I think they're actually going back to this technology because it's kind of designed to be easy on the clothes, and it just swishes the water up through the clothes. So feel free to kind of look at it if you want to. And I did forget this part of the story, but I was going to come back to the cornerstone. I was going to ask you, why does he get to hold it? Guy that made this is his son-in-law, Ted Heilman. I don't know if any of you knew Ted Heilman from Grove City here. He's an insurance guy. His wife was, a Lycan from Barkeyville, and it didn't get built there in Barkeyville, but Ted Heilman was here in Grove City and said, I think we can do it here. And they did. I could tell more stories, but
So when Barkey moved up and he bought all this land. Where had he earned his money to be so, to have enough money to buy all this?
Yeah, that's a very good question. It was his grandfather that gave the land. So I think Barkey, he ran a store, so he earned money, and he was very generous with it. Those guys, Peter Laux and Henry Barkey, both said, your money's not your money. So if you're hoarding it, you need to give it to the Lord. It's all about the mission. And so Henry Barkey would build these places, and his son-in-law worked together to build these houses. His name was Huntsberger, and they built several. There's several Huntsberger houses still there in Barkeyville. Any of the houses that look alike, that's the ones that Huntsberger built. But then they funded the building of the academy. They set aside a fund for the sending of missionaries, and of course, ironically, it was their own granddaughter that was the first one sent with those funds. But they passed that vision, they passed those values, they passed those convictions and that sense of community down. And it's a sad thing when those things are lost. But it's a beautiful thing when those things are retained and continue to be a part of how you do what you do.
The academy building's still there, or used for something
The
else?
academy building, when it closed in 1906, they tore most of it down, and so those the stones and the wood ended up in houses all around the area there, of course. But they left the one wing. They scaled it down to just a small little, looks like a one-room school now, and that part of the academy is still there. Yep.
And what's in it? What's being housed in there now?
Yeah, well, the vision for that was to be a museum, and it's set aside as that, but it's just not an active. You can't walk in like you can here, but hopefully someday it'll basically be around to tell this story. Yes.
For a number of years, I had an antique shop, and I had the opportunity to acquire one of those washing machines up near Clarion.
Really?
And the fellow that takes care of that museum
Okay.
came to my antique shop and bought that to take to that museum.
How about that?
And now you can add something else to your
Yeah, that's right.
presentation. Dr. Guy, we've really enjoyed this, and it has been a wonderful history lesson.
Thank you.
We have a little gift for you, because we have authors in our group, and Lillian Rear, you know her. Terry was just speaking to you, her husband. She
Okay.
wrote this book, so there's a lot of history of Grove City in there, even though you're not exactly from Grove City, but you're close.
That's right.
But we've certainly enjoyed your presentation, and for anybody who thought, oh, it'd be boring, it'll be a nursing home, they were wrong. I hope you'll all have some punch and cookies and get to look at his artifacts and get to talk with him. Thank you.
This one doesn't have a slide down back here. Isn't that amazing?
I didn't think so.
Oh.